Commissioner Twine, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord, we humbly come before your throne of grace, seeking your wisdom and guidance as we lead the city's business this evening. We thank and praise you for all your blessings. In your name, amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Presser, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Lloyd?
Here.
Poole?
Here.
Ms. Twine?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Lockhart?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Commissioners, we do not have a set of draft minutes for our last meeting of July 8, 2019. Those are not yet prepared, and so those will await our consideration at the next meeting. We turn now to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address the commission on any agenda items, please step to the microphone and share with us your name and thoughts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. My question this evening pertains to item number 2, which is the grant application to the U.S. Transportation for the Sandusky Bay Pathway. It looks like there's $2.8 million from the city for design and another $4.9 million for construction, totaling $7.7 million from the Sandusky Capital Funds with various tax increment finance agreements helping to pay for that. 3 questions I have for when you get to that portion of the meeting is, has there been a documented determination from the Erie County Auditor's Office referencing the exact yearly and annual value of the downtown TIF and the Cleveland Road TIF? Number 2 is, does the Cleveland Road TIF include the increased property values for Sports Force and now under construction indoor facility adjacent to Sports Force, and also future property value improvements or increases for the landing project? Third question would be is, what is the anticipated date when monies from the 2 TIFs will begin flowing into city accounts? Is there an intention to spend from city accounts initially, and then anticipating that the TIF agreements will be used to recoup direct city funds spent in the future? That question pertains to, I don't think there's any money coming in right now from those TIFs. So are we spending the money up front and hoping that those TIFs come to fruition, or is there money actually coming in at this time? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the commission on any of the agenda items? I understand that we have a Joy Noren with us with the Center for Peace and Through Understanding, and there is a gift that is on our agenda tonight, and we thank you for that. And you asked for an opportunity to address the commission, and we thank you for being here with us.
Good evening. My name is Joy Noren, and I'm a retired small business owner. I founded and directed a language training institute, which served the international business and professional community with ESL, or English as a Second Language training, for 32 years. Currently, my job is as a volunteer with the Welcoming Sandusky Task Force and with the Center for Peace Through Understanding. That's a 501c3 nonprofit corporation based here in Sandusky at 431 Columbus Avenue. The Center for Peace Through Understanding initiated the Sandusky Welcoming Resolution, which the City Commission passed last September 2018. Since the passing of the resolution, a number of volunteers have been working on behalf of the City of Sandusky with projects that promote a welcoming and inclusive spirit. Today, I'm here to just formalize a donation, a small donation, that was made $223.50 to the city for one of our neighborhood projects, that is planting a peace pole in one of Sandusky's neighborhoods. Working in coordination with Talon Floor in neighborhood outreach, we made an agreement that the city would pay half the cost of our peace pole and we would raise funds for the other half. So a peace pole, for those of you who don't know, is not religious, it's not political, and it's not expensive. It's a four-sided cedar pole that has the words, "May peace prevail on earth," in English, and in 7 other languages of choice. So there are more than 200,000 peace poles in 180 countries around the world. They're located in town squares, in city halls, in schools, parks, any place where goodwill is communicated. We believe that a peace pole with languages of our international residents and visitors will add to the welcoming spirit of Sandusky. So I'm happy to report that the process of raising the money for the peace pole was very positive. And Rehab Salhe, who with her husband Ali owns the 7-Eleven on Monroe and Camp Streets, collected money for the peace pole there in their neighborhood, and they would like to plant that pole on the west side of Sandusky near 7-Eleven. Rehab chose the languages for the peace pole based on the nationalities of their customers, who are both Sandusky residents and tourists on their way to Cedar Point and downtown. So the funds collected were donated to the Center for Peace Through Understanding, and in turn donated to the city. The peace pole is being ordered, and we expect that we will be able to plant it this fall. So thank you very much for supporting this project, and I'm sure that it will contribute. We hope it will contribute to harmony and also to economic development in the city of Sandusky.
Thank you, Ms. Nord. And thank you for your contributions to the city and the work that your group is doing. Commissioners, we have a number of different pieces of communication from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Would someone care to make a motion to accept those?
Second.
And a motion and second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Our first item is one that we passed on first reading at the last meeting. Mr. Haber has reminded me that it does not require a second motion this evening, so the question before us is there further debate on the proposed vacation of the alley? If not, then, Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the second reading, please?
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That vacation, or that legislation ordinance is adopted. Mrs. Cresser, would you present item number 2, please?
Yes, item number 2 is a resolution authorizing and ratifying the filing of a grant application through the U.S. Department of Transportation for the fiscal year 2019, better utilizing investments to leverage development discretionary program grant for the Sandusky Bay Pathway, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Then a motion and second discussion. Ms. Byington, I imagine you probably have some comments that you'd like to make and explain this legislation to us. If you would proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of commission. We're requesting ratification of an application for the build grant. This is the second round that we are applying for. We did apply for this last year, and we were very close in the running is what we were told, but we were not awarded, so we're applying again this year. We're requesting permission to apply. This grant, if awarded, would fund the remaining sections of the pathway that are not currently constructed and are not currently planned to be constructed as part of an existing project, such as Shoreline Drive or Meg Street. The grant is for construction only, not for design. The grant request is 75% of the construction cost, which is approximately $14,766. If the city is fully awarded, the total cost for construction and design is approximately $7,746,819. The city's share will be paid for with capital funds and various TIFs. The city will be issuing notes or bonds to finance the project. And we are requesting that this be passed under Section 14, as the deadline was July 15th, and we have officially applied. I'm happy to answer questions in regard to this, and I know that Director Lasko can speak in more detail to the TIF, the dollar amounts that are expected and when those would come in.
Thank you, Ms. Byington. Mr. Lasko, would you mind addressing
Chairman.
those?
If you would, just for a second.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Yeah, or we can come back to it, but the section about what we're actually doing, I'd like to ask.
Please.
Or we can wait.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about portions and sections of work being done. Would you describe what we're actually getting for the $7 million and what already exists from this
Okay.
pathway?
And I apologize if there's not a map that is part of the communication. We did submit this last year, and if it wasn't in this packet, I apologize. But, so the sections that are currently done, well, I'll start with the sections that are currently under construction. So there'll be Shoreline Drive, which will be constructed, and then a portion of Meg Street is going to be constructed as part of one of the engineering projects. Let's see if I have the map. We obviously are going to be also constructing the first phase from Sports Force to the Causeway. This does not include the Pier track. This would only include going along First Street to Meg. So we are not going to be applying in this portion for the construction on the Pier track. We would include the portion that the city's responsible for would be design and right-of-way acquisition. We will be looking at the Pier track in regard to right-of-way acquisition and doing more detailed research on the Pier track. I apologize, I don't have the map in front of me, but the sections that are going to also be constructed would be moving west, so we'll be on West Monroe, going down Edgewater to Venice Road. And Venice Road has an engineering project which will include part of the pathway on Venice Road. So it will go all the way from Sports Force on the east side, the eastern boundary, to the Western Municipal Corporation through either existing projects or the planned project the engineering has for Venice Road, and then all of the remainder sections from all the way from the east to the west.
If I understand you, Ms. Byington, and as I understood from the communication, this for all intents and purposes is the same grant application that the commission approved last year that was not funded.
Through you, Mr. President, it is the same application. The only difference is that the ODOT inflator percentage has been added, so the request is a little bit more, but because we are following ODOT's inflator percentage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd just like to point out that, these graphic representation meetings are held for the public who's watching this and have an understanding about what we're spending their money on, so that is a great help for getting the community to accept what we're doing as being in their benefit. So I'd appreciate that. I do have some other questions that I'll wait until after Mr. Lasko's done about the overall project. Thank you.
Mr. Lasko.
Yes, Mr. President, members of commission, just to answer a few of the questions I believe Mr. Schwanger asked, in no particular order. I believe he asked if any funds are currently being received or paid to the city yet based on any projects. They are not. We anticipate our first funds probably coming in the first half of 2020, which would be specifically from the downtown TIF. Just to refresh everyone, that's 36 different parcels that are subject to potential development. That each parcel may have its own 30-year window attached to it. So we believe that the first paying parcel will be the Schmidt Building at 246 East Market. That'll be the first time we're seeing any revenue from any completed projects. As we know, they run 12 months behind. Starting in 2021 is where we'll see a much larger uptick as the City Hall project comes online from a tax payment standpoint. BGSU, and then ultimately the second phase of the sports center. But to be candid, there aren't revenues yet till 2020. I believe another question was as relates to the Cleveland Road Tif, which are both phases of the sports complex included. They are not. The first phase, which has already been completed, I know is overwhelmingly outside of the city limits, is not included. It is just the second phase indoor sports complex, which is about 95% in the city, is what's, of those two phases is what's going to be paying into the TIF. I don't know if there were additional questions specifically that I may have missed.
There was a question posed about whether the auditor or any other government entity has made a determination regarding the value of the payments under the TIFs.
I'll defer to the city manager. What I will say is the downtown TIF specifically, we won't know until the auditor comes in and reevaluates those parcels. They're currently conducting a reappraisal of the Schmidt building. That'll be the first time that we understand what that value is and what that revenue stream is. The logistics and specifics about the second phase of Sports Center, which candidly are the main revenue stream for the entire pathway, are a little bit different, and I can defer to the city manager.
I just want to clarify one point that you made, Ms. Blasco. I don't think that everyone necessarily understands that real estate taxes are paid in arrears.
Correct.
And so we are, in effect, earning those TIF monies for projects that are part of that this year. They don't get paid until next year because you always pay 1 year after the taxes are due.
That's correct. So the best example is the Schmidt building. It was done in 2018, but that reappraisal isn't occurring until now. So although it may be the new valuation, those receipts aren't going to be till 12 months in arrears, as you pointed out.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wobser.
Through the commission president to the commission, I did speak with Auditor Jeffrey last week regarding the valuation of the Cedar Point Sports Center TIF, and they're in active conversations with the property owner for the indoor. And while that process is ongoing, they do believe the baseline for that will be at least $500,000 a year for that 30-year period. And so that alone is about a $15 million potential. Now, there's a pilot or a payment in lieu of taxes to the schools for 10% of that, but that piece alone will help to backstop any of the expenses paid for the design of the first phase of the landing or this phase as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Chairman, we've received communications about the ongoing TIFs, whether they're taking money away from the school system or our viability or our ability to afford to pay for these things out of our capital funds. So if the staff could kind of go into detail in that regard.
Through the commission president to the commissioner, these tax increment financing arrangements were very transparent and were probably about 2 years of conversation with the school board of the Sandusky City School. And ultimately, the schools supported unanimously the passage of both tax increment financing packages because they understood two things. One, these projects that will ultimately pay taxes will only pay taxes if they're able to go forward. So there's a but-for challenge. It's easy to assume after the fact that a project could have or would have been completed without a TIF, but ultimately they can be a critical gap financing piece. And so the fact is that 10% of the new taxes will go to the schools of a project that may not have happened otherwise. So just for example, the Cedar Point Sports Center indoor project, which is probably the largest of the projects that we'll be paying in, will contribute over $1.5 million to the schools over the life of that tax increment financing. If that project were unable to go forward, the schools would receive zero. So it's actually a net increase to the schools of the current tax roll. And then in addition to that, I think, particularly as it relates to the pathway project, the schools were very enthusiastic because I think their belief is that any direct tax revenue potentially foregone that may or may not have been possible without the tax being, or the TIF being passed, that it's going to add value throughout the city. As Director Byington mentioned, that pathway is going to extend from the very western limits of the city to the very eastern limits of the city. And being that we're a very shallow city as far as our depth, we're about 1.5 miles deep at our widest point. We're helping to connect every property in the city of Sandusky in a meaningful way to the lake. And I think their view is that the potential property tax growth that will come from that access, which has been proven out in other places, more than offsets it. And so it was a very deliberate and transparent conversation. We spoke about it publicly with this commission, with the school board, at public meetings. And ultimately, I think they believed it was in their best interest, and certainly we believe it's in the best interest of the city and the schools that the projects do go forward. But again, every single one of those dollars or projects that will pay into a tax increment financing, the schools will receive a payment in lieu of taxes that they would not have received had these properties not been improved.
Additional, go ahead.
And the second part would have been our capital funds being expended. How is it that we're able to afford that if we are or in the future?
Certainly. Well, a few things. One, we dedicated 1/2 of the new admissions tax increase for issue 8 towards what we call catalytic infrastructure, and that was something that Cedar Point requested. So if you look, we're dedicating $1.5 million in new infrastructure dollars, which is beyond, I think, what was a pledge of about $800,000, almost by twice, towards local street resurfacing, trees, parks, sidewalks, basic infrastructure. But then that increase of the admissions tax, we dedicated, I believe, 3 years ago towards the construction of the pathway or other what we call catalytic infrastructure projects. So it's all admissions tax funded through the capital account, and we are putting those funds aside each year, which are helping to pay the pathways portion of projects like Shoreline Drive, Meg Street, or Venice Road, and ultimately will help to provide what the TIFs, and to backstop, our hope is that the TIFs will be able to finance most of this, but there are local resources that are admissions tax dollars that were pledged transparently as part of the issue 8 process to help pay for things like the pathway.
Mr. Webster, if you would please verify, I believe that those funds are all in the capital plan that we've looked at for the last
Yes,
couple of years.
absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Poole.
With regard to the first portion, what you spoke to, that explains why we all, the school board and all of us, support the TIF project. That's the why. The question, I believe, deals with do we have the money to do that? You're talking about a finite amount of money for each of these projects, $9 million, based on no projections of how much money we're actually going to collect. And that is really the question. The $500,000 a year that you projected from the auditor is a start. And that's all we're asking for, is an estimate of what you think the money possibly could be to pay for this before we vote for it. And that's really what it amounts to. You're asking us to vote, and the school board did the same. Recognize they'd get 10% of whatever comes, and we all realize and expect that the projects are of some value to the community. But now you're spending money based on money that we don't know how much it's going to be. And even worse than that, you've not even given us an estimate. And that's really what all I'm asking. I'm going to ask, just to be clear about that, with regard to your answer on issue 2, the second issue you gave, the emissions tax, unless it's had a comeback, it was 40% down from last year in May. I don't know what it is this year. The finance has not sent the information out, but our admissions collections from the last finance sheet that I got were down from the year before. Admissions is tied to weather and a lot of other things. And again, I'm not saying abandon these projects, but I recognize that voting for them on pure faith without even just an estimate from you is asking a big one for this, okay? So just understand, Greg and I both, Mr. Lockhart and I both support progress, but just plain guesswork and hoping is not sufficient. And if you say we don't have any idea, then maybe we need to think twice before we commit millions of dollars to a study, put together a bike plan that you've already been turned down once for the money to build it. So that needs to be thought through thoroughly. 12-mile bike path across town is a big get. Most places do small bits of projects when they have the money for them and evaluate which one they do first based on a priority of how it impacts their community. It's ambitious to go all the way across the town with one big package, but all the money we committed, the $2.9 million we did last meeting, it could end up like whatever was spent in '06 when you planned the first bike path, and now we're planning it again. So that's where I'm at on it. I'm going to vote let me ask one question. If we don't get this grant, what happens next? Or are we committed to something if we don't get the grant? What are we committed to if we don't get the grant? And that'll determine how I vote.
Through the commission president,
Mr. Wobser.
I do think that we are being opportunistic in applying to these funds, but as you described how most communities do it, I think that's actually exactly what we've been doing. As Director Byington stated, this year, Shoreline Drive section of the pathway will be completed, and that was because we were able to do that by attaching it to a pre-planned and existing project. Next year, a large segment of Venice Road will be completed, and we're able to do that strategically and opportunistically because there was a planned water and sewer line project there. The following year, Meg Street will be done, which was again an application to ODOT, and we were able to tag along those pathway funds that we created for that. So I think we see these federal funds as a way to complete what was another mandate that we heard from the community, while not a certainty, a possibility to complete the entire pathway quickly. But should we not be able to complete it, or we're not successful at this grant, we then aren't utilizing the funds that are pledged as a match to this grant. And I think what you'll see us is that we will strategically do phase by phase this project. It'll just take us longer to do it without those federal dollars. And then the piece of the pathway that's currently being designed, which is Landing Park and everything from the causeway heading east to the city limits, that is the piece that is currently under design. And through our funds from the Cedar Point Sports Center TIF, we believe can be substantially completed with those funds. And so we do think that the pieces that are funded already will be the Cedar Point Sports Center, or the phase one landing, Venice, Megs, and Shoreline, but then all those other dollars, or that funds that are set aside from the emissions tax each year. And then there's the downtown TIF collects, which hasn't been pledged at all for any of this, starts to collect. We can use those to do it on a phase by phase approach. But this is an opportunity, 80% of those dollars paid for by the federal government more quickly. So it'll both speed it up and then save us resources that could be potentially put towards other projects.
Thank you, Mr. Wobser. Additional questions or comments from the commission?
If no one else has, I have one last.
Please.
What you described, if that was on paper and written so that I could look at it, other than just you have the broad, big picture in your mind, this may simply be a lack of communication in terms of the way these are presented. As I look at what was presented today, dropped here under section 14, all that long explanation, I can't remember everything you said, although pieces make sense. If you present this to us in a fashion that everyone can understand, you have how much in the future you have, I'll be more than happy to jump on board. But I don't do well with when it's unsure, and the fact that you're comfortable is good for you and those who aren't as tight as I am.
Your point's well taken.
Mr. Gresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Lloyd? Yes. Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the resolution, please.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady? Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with Barnes Nursery Incorporated of Huron, Ohio for the runoff reduction strategic tree planting project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lockhart.
I don't know, I think Mr.
Mr.
Brady was just slightly faster than I was. He's a senior commissioner, so I'll let him go first.
Brady.
Item 3 is the result of our engineering department being, as they have been for the last 7 years or so, very proactive on issues like this. This is another one of the GLRI grants that we've been successful at obtaining. And this one has to do with planting trees. And this is a direct result of our engineer, Mr. Aaron Klein, this being a very high priority for him, the environment, I want to, he's not with us tonight. We are represented by the engineering department, but I just want kudos to go out to Mr. Klein once again for his proactive approach at obtaining these kind of funds for us. It allows us to do a lot of things that would come out of our own pocket if we didn't have funds like this. And I had an opportunity to read some type of a Greek proverb today that talked about a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they're never going to sit under. And that is certainly the case here today. We're going to plant a lot of trees that none of us really benefit from, but people that come after us, whether they're our kids or grandkids or great-grandkids, will certainly benefit from that. And our hats are off to our engineering department for being proactive in obtaining dollars like this. Good for them.
Mr. Lockhart.
Yeah. I was going to say something similar to that. This is a good product of the engineering department and also the tree commission, being able to fill these needs that we need throughout the city. When I was on the tree commission, one of the bigger things that was a concern is not only taking down the trees, but putting them back. Every resident had, not every resident, but a lot of residents were concerned about falling trees or potential trees to fall on homes or property. So this is an excellent opportunity to fill that gap that we've needed for some time. So I'm happy for the tree commission to have this opportunity to have this grant, and also engineering in the city.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Bull.
I just didn't see, did the tree commission put together this list of where they're going and so forth? Is that this tree commission product? How do we determine where the trees went and what they were going to be?
Karen Klein, they actually worked with the tree commission, and they worked with Tom Spear from Forestry to select the locations. So there is a list of locations where they're going to be, but yeah, they were all involved.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions or comments? As we've been taking down trees, there have been a lot of questions about when we're going to start planting them. So this is 270 trees, so that's a pretty good down payment on the trees that we need to get planted. So unless there are additional questions or comments, Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Lloyd? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Now on the ordinance?
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 4, please.
Yes, item number 4 is an ordinance authorizing and approving a grant in the amount of $15,000 through the Small Business Assistance Grant Program to Loris Printing Incorporated in relation to the property located at 2111 Cleveland Road, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Story, I see you in the audience. I think you had a presentation that you wanted to make to the commission, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brief. We're here tonight on behalf of Loris Printing. This is their building since 2012 at 2111 Cleveland Road. For the past 53 years, Loris Printing has been in business in Sandusky. Sorry. For the past 53 years, Loris Printing has been based here in Sandusky, specializing in commercial social printing. Initially a mom and pop business, they're now in their second generation. The owners of the company are Debbie Hofer, 51%, and Craig Hofer, 49%. He's in the audience tonight to answer any questions. The company recently acquired Lakeshore Graphic Industries, another local company, to broaden the services and offerings and expand their coverage area. Today, the company has now outgrown its space after these acquisitions and needs to expand. The building itself has approximately 9,000 square feet, but the usable square footage within the building as it sits today is 6,200 square feet. This project is a renovation, a rehabilitation, to allow the company to use the entirety of the 9,000 square feet of the interior space, which currently sits as basically garage storage areas, and to upgrade the site infrastructure and building utilities for the entirety of the building site. Included in this infrastructure upgrade, electrical hardware necessary to operate this printing equipment, HVAC equipment, plumbing, gas line improvements. And again, this renovation will be to the northern end of the building, which currently is a garage and storage area. And this is done primarily to expand their existing operations and accommodating the growth that they're experiencing. All good stuff. This new expansion will allow the company to expand their roster of full-time employees and will permit the company to grow their sales and revenues accordingly. Here's the sources and uses line items. As you can see, the critical one for us here is the City ED Small Business Assistance Grant, $15,000, which amounts to 18.6% of the total project, well below the threshold, 60%, which is allowed under the program rules. This was my attempt to capture the clutter, per se, and the middle picture there is of the garage and garage and storage area that will be renovated and into usable space. Project was brought before our EDIC committee on July 9th. The committee unanimously approved the $15,000 grant. The project will begin immediately and will be completed by year end.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Story or comments regarding the legislation or any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lockhart.
I'd like to thank Loris for continuing to do business in our city and expanding, and of course expanding to the Hancock location. So it's awesome that you would even expand there and keep that business here. It's been there for, I think, 100 years. I think you might know, but it was there for a long time.
Yes, Commissioner Brady.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you might know. Between the 50 years or so. And I really appreciate that. You've done good work in the community, and you've been a trusted source for printing for some time, and I've seen your work, and so I really appreciate that. It's a small business in our community.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
There is a point that I think you've omitted in your bio of this company, and Commissioner Lockhart may have alluded to it just now, but this company relocated to this location a few years ago. And when they did that, they had a choice to go a lot of other places other than in the city. They chose to stay in the city. And that's the kind of thing that gets my attention. And now, if you look at the numbers, they've really got skin in the game here. Yeah, we're gonna put $15,000 into this, but they're putting $30-some thousand into it. These are the kind of things that will make us successful, and I think will make them successful also. They're rolling the dice. They're willing to take a chance. That's what business people do. So I say right on. Thanks for doing it.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we're all repeating ourselves because we're all so pleased that someone's been part of our community for so long, believes in us, and we're more than happy to contribute to this. You additionally, Debbie and Craig, you both are big supporters of the school and all the drives to improve the school. So just thank you, and we're happy to make be part of this.
Well, at the risk of being part of the group that's fawning over you, I want to echo what Mr. Poole said. And I want to say something else too. A lot of people look at printing and they think it's a dying industry. You two and the team that you put together are proof that it's not. That if you're entrepreneurial and you're smart, you work your tail off, and I know that you do, that you can be successful. The comment about being able to stay in the community or move out to maybe green pastures or greenland or brand new space that you didn't have to renovate is one that is important. We just saw that Gunlocks go through that and build out the space, and they too saw the value of staying here and expanding their business and adding jobs. And I know that you've added a lot of jobs over the years. It's quiet. Don't toot your horn, but we are here to toot your horn for you and thank you for what you do every day. This is difficult work, and we get a lot of questions as commissioners about what's Sandusky doing to create jobs and spur on economic development. Well, I think this is a prime example of that. It's company by company, it's job by job. It often requires a little bit of seed money on the city's part to make the financing work. We're happy to do that because it's a long-term investment in our community. And we know that the jobs that we're going to add in this community and that we are adding, I think at a pretty rapid clip, although there's no way to know that number for sure. But the jobs that we're going to continue to add in this community and are adding in this community are in small businesses just like yours. So thank you for stepping up, and thank you for staying in Sandusky. Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady? Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance, please.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 5, please, Mrs. Cresser.
Item number 5 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to approve a second change order for work being performed by Barnes Nursery of Huron, Ohio for the asbestos abatement and demolition of 624 Camp Street project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Brady? Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Now on the ordinance?
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart? Mr. Brady? Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted, and that completes a rather short agenda for the evening. We turn the meeting over to you, Ms. Wobser, for your city manager's report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with donations. First, a donation of $233.50 was received from the Center for Peace Through Understanding to go toward a peace pole. You heard the very great description of the peace pole and the reasoning behind it earlier. I did want to mention that it's actually going to be the second peace pole in the city of Sandusky. We actually have one at one of the small triangular parks that sits at the corner of Hancock and Jefferson and Huron that I walk by often. So this will be nice to add one to the west side of town. We have one on the east side of town. So I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So move.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. With our thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to the police department, we wanted to give a hearty congratulations to Sergeant Ron Snyder on his retirement. Effective August 7th, Sergeant Snyder has 30 years serving the citizens of Sandusky, along with an additional 4 years of military service. Big thank you to Ron for his dedicated service. Also, we'll be distributing popsicles to the children in attendance at the OGO Bookmobile locations on July 23rd at Lions Park from 10:30 a.m. to noon, and at MacArthur Park on August 6th from 12:30 to 2 p.m. These are our last 2 dates of the year. For the fire department received an EMS grant from the Ohio Department of Public Safety, the amount of $2,765 to purchase equipment. They also participated in the gathering, which took place in the city on July 13th. For the Public Works Department, an in-house resurfacing update. The tire lane on Monroe Street has been completed between Columbus and Meigs. Sherman is scheduled for 3 weeks, starting July 22nd between Pierce and Graham. Another crew will be starting on Follett between Wayne and Columbus the week of July 29th, which will also be a 3-week project. For the Jackson Street Pier project, after the revised utility design was finalized in late June, excavation and dewatering equipment were delivered to the site on July 5th, with construction commencing on July 11th. As with all projects, the schedule is updated as progress allows, but it remains dependent on utility installation and how late into fall pavement work can occur before the cold weather sets in. But we do intend to provide regular updates throughout the project and to let folks know as we get closer what the deadlines for completion of work will be. For the planning department, the next Walk Wayne Hike Hancock event will be held on Wednesday, August 14th. The regular planning commission meeting is scheduled Wednesday, July 24th at 4:30 p.m. in the commission chambers. The regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 22nd, also in the commission chambers. And the regular Landmark Commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, August 21st at 4:30 p.m., also in the Commission chambers. The regular Arts and Culture Commission meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, August 20th at 5 p.m. in the City Commission chambers. And for recreation, just an update on downtown events. The city continues to undertake an analysis of all existing downtown events, including the car show. with a goal of finalizing recommendations by the end of the year. The goal of this process is to balance the needs of existing events with the evolving needs of other downtown stakeholders. I wanted to speak to that today because I did hear that there were some questions within the community about what the plans were for the downtown car show. And while we had spoken with them earlier in the spring, there have been no formal conversations other than, again, we're looking at all events to determine what is the best location, what is the best night of the week. We surveyed downtown stakeholders and got responses from 39 of those stakeholders. But our goal is not to chase off any event. Our hope is that all events can continue to thrive and prosper. But we're just trying to balance what is best for those events with the changing growth that's taking place within the downtown. So we're happy to answer any specific questions of the commission on that. But the idea that somehow an event was not going to have its permit renewed, I think is not accurate, and we're happy to continue conversation with the car show and hope that they'll be in Sandusky for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Commissioners, questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman.
Lockhart.
In relation to the car show and the gathering, the manager's saying that they'll have their permits renewed, but is the staff suggesting that they're going to be relocated from where they are, or what is the status of it? I think folks at both organizations, both for the gathering and the cruise, the car cruise or the car show, are concerned that they're going to have to be relocated to a space that's not conducive to their events. Can you speak to that?
Certainly, Commissioner Lockhart, through the commission president, to Commissioner Lockhart and everyone else. We sat down with the organizers of the car show very early this year and talked to them about some of the challenges that we'd heard from several downtown stakeholders about the event. And what we wanted to make sure that we put forward in that meeting was we're committed to working with the car show to try to find ways to meet their needs, and if there was something that they didn't think was a fit for them, we would do our absolute best to accommodate it. We went over several options, including locations that range from the existing location to other locations, and we also talked about the potential of shifting to a different day of the week. One of the challenges that was brought up by several stakeholders is that Friday's already a very busy night downtown. Maybe it wasn't 14 years ago when the car show started. And then if we're wanting to stimulate the downtown through events, maybe weeknights are the best way to do that. But again, we were very clear with the organizers, as we've been with every event. I want to make sure that nothing has been specific to the car show. We're actually meeting with every event that takes place in the city, is to say, we view this as a partnership and an opportunity to make sure the event is served well, but that all the other stakeholders are served well. But I want to make it absolutely clear, we haven't spoken to them since spring. This was always intended to be a year-long process, and no decisions at all have been made, and there's an ongoing dialogue taking place.
With respect to the the gathering, which is held on Saturday this past weekend, I guess the position that the gathering would have, and the vendors and things that I spoke with, is that they were minimally taking up space that would be utilized by any downtown business because of their location. Being up on West Washington and then up towards Columbus Ave. And so the area that they were in, they feel as though it's probably one of the better areas for them. And I think they got the impression that they were not going to be allowed to be where they are today or where they were previously and in the future from staff.
Well, sir, to the best of your knowledge, has that been communicated to the folks who organized the gathering?
Through the commission president to Commissioner Lockhart, I'm not aware of any specific conversations with the gathering that staff had, so I can't speak directly to that. I know Jason Whirling, our recreation superintendent, is here. He might be able to add a little more detail. Yeah. So.
Mr. Whirling.
In regards to through the commission president to the commission, in regards to the gathering, we did have conversations, as we have with all of our special events we have coming through the town, through the downtown area. Some of the issues that we run into is when we close down like streets like Washington and Columbus. Washington, since it is a federal route, becomes more difficult. As we go through each event each year, we're trying to look at each one to see whether the impact of the event and the attendance of events are, I guess, large enough to constitute all the staff and the resources that we do to detour traffic all the way around the downtown and outside the downtown area. So we did have a conversation with Pastor Deb about the gathering, saying when we first met earlier this year that, yes, we were going to try and make it happen this year for her because it was, the event did take 1 year off, came back this year, and we said, as we look into next year, how would we keep doing that event, whether it would be in a different location, somewhere in the downtown area, and that was discussed.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments?
Well,
Mr. Mocker.
What was the result of the discussion?
The gathering did happen 2 weeks.
No, I mean for the future, I meant to say.
We haven't had a follow-up meeting to how the event went. I was not downtown for that event, so I would welcome a conversation to see how things went and look into 2020.
And it's a means, in your impression, it's a means of the number of staff and things that we have to do to accommodate the events for the staff is your consideration, or is there other considerations that would be prohibitive?
Detouring traffic around the downtown is something that we look at and want to make sure that we have events. I think one of the other events that we detour traffic for is the Stars and Stripes Festival, which has a pretty big following and on 4th of July. But when we look into further events that do close down a lot of streets or multiple streets, we want to look at everyone and make sure that we're doing it and taking a look at everyone as we move forward.
Chief, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just add to Jason's point is really looking at Washington Row and, the route through town. We have to direct traffic and we have to go all the way down Monroe Street. So that's primarily the concern, just like you mentioned, and you just have to evaluate it and make sure it makes sense. We backed off Bike Week from using Washington and blocking that off for the exact reason we had historically blocked it off for Friday and Saturday, and then we pushed back to just Saturday just to keep that route open. So it's all the events, but there's only a few of them that affect that detour.
Thank you, Mr. Worling. Just additional questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman.
Cool.
Problem here seems to be that, Mr. Wipser, as you discussed, this is in discussion with the intention of making a decision at the end of the year. This has come to our attention, at least to some of the commissioners, because unbeknownst to you, as you've said, staff have either said or indicated to folks things that are more definitive about what's going to happen, that they're going to be moved or they're not going to be allowed to move forward with their projects. And again, this gets back to about communications, that, it's something that you can work toward, I suppose, take care of. But the concept of department directors and hourly employees or whoever it is that's working down below you, stepping up and making decisions about, or giving the impression that they can make decisions about major events for downtown is something that just needs to be looked into, because that appears to be that's the miscommunication. People are communicating to some commissioners that they're being told things that are not what you actually are. There's not totally accurate. It may be in the general vicinity.
Sure.
But people take from what employees say. They take it more seriously than apparently people seem to think. We just watch for that.
I will, and through the commission president, Commissioner Poole, I do think, because I have been communicating with staff throughout this process, and it's the second sort of iteration of trying to make sure that we're communicating with these events. So in fact, staff's comments to these events are trying to avoid misunderstandings and miscommunications. But I think what's happened is, and even as Jason stated, and I know as Mackenzie's had conversation with events too, or even myself, there's a really heightened sensitivity to any changes to a lot of these events. And so I think sometimes we try to keep a really open dialogue. We've never communicated any event that a change was definitive, but oftentimes they're nervous, and so they may go to a commissioner or to Facebook or to other venues to express that concern. And so it's difficult for us, because the second that we start to talk to some events, the second it becomes much more public, But unless we start to talk to these events to see what is feasible, we can't really have a dialogue or work with them. And so we're trying to find that balance. But I do think staff has actually been very sensitive over a period of several years. And I think what's often not necessarily represented in some of these conversations and with what Chief got into at the closures is whenever we close, say, Washington through Washington Park, I hear from a number of downtown stakeholders that are frustrated with that lack of public access. And I know public access is a term that comes up often with this commission and with this public, but if we continue to close off public access to the public right-of-way, that is a disservice to our constituents who are trying to get to either businesses or to utilize downtown streets. So really, this is all about trying to find that balance, and we will do our best to communicate. But I think we've actually, in some ways, we're getting our toe stubbed because we're trying to communicate, not because of a lack of communication.
Additional questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Murray, I just want to note that the August 20th Public Arts and Culture Commission meeting is being rescheduled. I'm sorry you didn't know that. I reached out to the members today to reschedule that, so it's not the 20th.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, you know, that interruption wasn't appropriate.
Ms. Pulver, proceed.
Let's just consider, I understand what the staff is trying to do, and I think that that's fine. Just recognize about what you think they may have conveyed and compare and contrast that to what you actually said. You don't know. So your thoughts that staff is going out of their way to be sensitive and so forth and so on is not supported by the feedback that we get from folks. And these, the people in the community that run these large events are perfectly competent and capable adults that are able to convey back to us what they received in information from staff. And I'm not saying that there's not accident miscommunication and people mistake things, but this blanket writing it off as the people were nervous and they answer and they give commissioners bad information is not something I'm prepared to support. And I'd like to suggest that we avoid the situation where you may anger someone to the point that they come to the microphone and openly say that's not what happened. We don't need that to happen here in these meetings. The concept where things happen in the community for your staff and then you try to defend it, and we just don't want to get back in that tit for tat. Your management of your relationship with these various groups is for you to do, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it. But the concept of it's always you guys are right and the folks you're talking to are wrong is different. Let me speak just a moment about closing down, events closing down that Washington Street for those 2 blocks and not having to redirect traffic. The impact on downtown businesses depends on what the event is. Those two blocks of Washington Street can't be an issue because you have already redirected all the Cedar Point traffic down Monroe Street. There's a sign at Tiffin and Monroe that tells them to turn. So trying to say that it's a major problem for businesses downtown, for the traffic they're not getting, but they're already not getting it, isn't something I'm prepared to support. And that's really what amounts to the gathering. And some of these events only occur, they don't occur that often. And the gathering, I happen to be down here, and the idea that people who couldn't drive down Columbus Ave to get to something in the first block of Columbus Ave that had to drive around Jackson Street to Market is just, to me, isn't real supportable that the gathering is such a big bother for downtown. Lastly, you've done some surveys. You're making decisions based on information to gathered, which makes it all public information. So please just provide me a copy of your minutes of your meetings and whatever information you're using and the conclusions that you're coming from it, so the public, so we can see it.
Certainly.
That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Lockhart.
The same goes for me. Now that you're in the planning process and obviously the public has contacted us, I'd like to see some of the information going forward as to how you'd want to do it.
Absolutely.
So whenever people have conversations, there will be misunderstandings. That's the reason we have more conversations. That's the only solution to that. I think to your point that you need to begin the dialogue at some point, that's pretty good. The dialogue just has to continue, and I accept that that dialogue is going to continue with the different groups that who have events in the downtown part of the city. I do want to point out that the quickest way to upend the city's progress is to hamstring the staff. If someone misspeaks, okay, that's something for Mr. Wobser to sort out, certainly. But I think we need to be cautious about criticizing the staff when we just don't know all the circumstances. I'm not saying that anybody has done that. I'm just saying that I watch other cities. I think about the city's past history when we had staff nearly in a state of paralysis in the mid to late 2000s. They were just afraid to move in any direction. And I don't want to go back to those times. I'm not taking any shots at anyone, Mr. Poole.
I realize you know.
And just highlighting that as an important, as I think about how we have made progress, I think we've made a lot of progress because you've empowered your staff. That doesn't mean that we don't need mid-course corrections here and there, but I think we want to make sure they remain empowered. So that's my only thought. Additional questions or comments for the city manager? Any items of old business?
Mr. Chairman, one.
Mr. Poole.
For the engineer. At the last meeting, we talked about getting a presentation on the changes to Jackson Street Pier and Shoreline Drive. I assume it's a change order we have to vote on anyway, change orders.
Yes.
So just where are we on that? I'm not asking you to do it, but to do anything tonight. Idea how soon we're going to see that?
I will check with Director Klein.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waddington.
I'd like to see if we could do, I know I asked 3 or 4 months ago, a follow-up on the NASA intake. It seems like that's stagnant out there right now. We could follow up, maybe have engineering in the next meeting or so, if they could get back with us what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for quite some time about the need for secondary intake and a replacement secondary intake. If the NASA intake is a go, great. If it's not, let's move on to a different secondary intake. I agree with that. Additional items of old business.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Twine.
Last meeting, there were some concerns about residential parking at the Jackson Street parking lot. We did take some initiatives and moves to make better signage in that area, so we're going to check that out and see how that works moving forward.
Additional items of old business. Any items of new business? So we'll turn to audience participation in a moment. Let me just say something so that I get this out. When it comes to public comment at city commissions, it is a long and cherished tradition, and it is an important time for commissioners and staff to hear what those who appear here wish to say. It does not mean that there should be an immediate answer or reaction. It takes time to process these things. The obligation of all public officers is to weigh the interests of often completely competing constituencies, including those here today, the 25,000 residents who are not here today, including those who aren't old enough to vote, and we also have to think about future residents as well. It takes time to gather enough opinions and research and think about the right answers. Against a lot of advice, I started answering questions raised during public comments or asking staff to answer questions in my role as commission president almost 6 years ago. No other community does this. And for a long time, I felt it was a good innovation. But I think it's gone too far, and it has been abused on too many occasions. Public comment time is not an occasion for answering rhetorical questions, arguing policy points, or rehashing issues which have already been fully addressed at these meetings, even if not with the particular speaker present or to the particular speaker's satisfaction. Going forward, I will continue, and I believe as a commission, we will continue to welcome the comments, even if the factual predicates are inaccurate. Public comment time will be limited to public comments and will not be an occasion for individual commissioners to raise issues of old or new business, as there is separate time on the agenda for that. Many of the questions posed during public comment time also seek information that is not at the fingertips of staff or commission. So in order to answer questions regarding specific information, staff has created a new email address called Ask the City at the usual email address extension, which is at ci.sandusky.oh.us. There is also a new icon added on the front page of the city's website. It just says Ask Us. And you can submit a question there, and it'll be answered during normal business hours in a reasonable period of time. It'll be routed to the right staff person to be able to answer that. Both the Sandusky City Schools and Perkins Township have similar addresses by which to take in questions, which will then be routed to the appropriate department heads. I understand from both organizations that this has worked well for residents. Again, still more advice. I have been too lenient, and I take responsibility for this as well, about enforcing time limits during this portion of the meeting. But I am persuaded that that is no longer fair to the staff and the other participants, including others wishing to speak. Now, if that becomes a problem, we will not follow a confrontational approach, which some jurisdictions take from time to time, but we will simply adjourn. We're not going to arrest anybody. We're not going to have anybody hauled out of here. We're just going to conclude the meeting. So I want to make that clear going forward. And with that, I open it up to public comments.
Mr. Chairman.
It's time for public comments, Mr. Lockhart.
Mr.
Lockhart, you're out of order.
Well, no, I was asking.
Mr. Lockhart, you are out of order. It's public comment time.
And
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
No.
A point of order, you don't get to rule over, okay?
Mr. Haber?
What's the point of order?
He can't just come up with a rule made up on his own. Keep individual commissioners who are individually elected from speaking to questions brought up by the audience. I fully agree with all of what you wrote in terms of there are some questions we don't have answers to which the public should be told, if you choose, that we don't have an answer, we'll get back to you. But I, as an individual commissioner, if someone asks a question and wish to speak, I can do it. The point of order is he's out of order. He can't restrict me from answering a question brought up at this meeting. I have a right to speak.
Answer the question.
There you go. I have a right to answer if I choose. He can't just say that you can't answer questions.
I don't think that was what was proposed.
Yeah, that is what he said. He said there was no answer. There weren't going to be any answers. I have every right as an elected official to do that.
Well, let Mr. Haber clarify.
I didn't take the president's stances that you can't answer them. It was you can't propose the question. Am I wrong on that one?
You've clarified it, and I will follow your guidance.
Do you accept it? I mean, is that?
I accept that Mr. Poole may answer the question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you essentially put something on the floor that changes the rules to which we do our business by.
No.
By stating that certain things can or cannot happen any further, that would be a change of our rules and practices.
We have existing rules about public comment, so.
Certainly.
Just indicating I've been too lax on enforcing those.
Well, I agree with you on enforcing time limits. That's certainly fair, but when you're saying that the public can't come here and ask, this is the time and place that they come to their government to ask questions. That's why we have a city public meeting.
It's a public comment period, Mr. Lockhart.
No, it's audience participation.
No,
it's not the same thing, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to see where you find that in the rules, that they cannot ask questions at this time.
They're certainly welcome to ask questions. We're not going to answer the questions.
You're not going to answer the questions. I'm going to answer the questions if I can.
All right.
So let's make it clear that if you choose not to answer the questions, that's fine.
I'm not going to direct staff to answer the question.
Well, let's just make it clear that the commission, we're not going to refuse to answer questions. If you choose to do that, like he said, you're independently elected, that's fine. I agree with some of the things you said, but not in a whole, in its entirety.
Understood.
So.
We'll sort it out as we go along.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Lloyd.
Through you to Mr. Hayberger. Audience participation is a time for them to express anything that they would like to express. Other than that, that's our policy. We allow them to have that time, and they have 5 minutes.
Through you, Commission President, to Commissioner Lloyd. Yeah, this is not a question and answer session. This is, they can feel free to ask the questions, and many times it may take.
So what our chairman is requesting is that we follow the policy that's been in place for many years.
No.
Chairman, I believe we have someone at the podium that would like to make some comments.
Yes, I think so.
Still haven't finished. You brought something to the table that if I have questions for, I'm entitled. He put it on the table that we're going to have an Ask Us. I have questions about with the Ask the City. I have questions about that. He can't just throw it on the table and not give us an opportunity to speak to it and then call the next
It's
order on the
simply a
agenda.
proclamation that you're making if we don't discuss it.
Sure. Ma'am, would you?
I just want to, I got one question about the Ask Us policy,
So-
what it's going to be.
All right, could you pause for 1 minute? Wait, Mr. Lockhart, stop interrupting. Mr. Poole, would you please proceed?
I would simply like to know that the answers are going to be posted on this bulletin board or whatever the official word for it is. You write in to Ask Us, we post you forward it to whoever, and it goes back up for all to see. And it'll be there for what period of time that the public is able to read it?
That is not my understanding of how the staff intends for that to work.
Well, that's kind of what public questions are about the public wanting to know what's going on. So why would you answer a question and then not post it? It needs more discussion, and I'll cut it from there.
Very good.
But as it's written, if you think, okay, done.
We'll have to flesh that out in the weeks ahead. Please proceed.
I'd like to give you my name and address.
Please.
Nancy Birch, it's 105 West Water Street, 2A, Sandusky. I don't have a question. I would just like to say thank you for addressing the parking situation for residents. It's going to be ongoing, I understand that, but those signs, really changing the signage was a huge help. There's empty spots there once in a while now, and I think people are paying attention to it. So I just want to say thank you, and the police department comes pretty quick. So anyway, that has helped a whole lot, and I think everybody in my building appreciates it. So.
Thank you, Ms. Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way, representing Friends of the Jackson Street Pier at this time. 2 weeks ago, we were here and we gave our presentation on what the Friends of the Jackson Street Pier came up with for the above-ground plans for the Jackson Street Pier. I know many of you had not seen that. So in that 2-week period, we again today stand by our grounds that since the final plans for the above-ground work have not been presented by Donnelly because of the 5-month delay on the utility work below ground, that this body has the ability to direct staff and the city manager to go back and have a sit-down with Donnelly on how to change the above-ground plans, which would include shortening the green space by 1/3, eliminating the 3,200 square foot, what some call a pole barn. I guess the technical word is market pavilion, which could be built anywhere along Sandusky's waterfront, and also adding additional parking out at the north end, and maintaining or retaining a space location for the food vendors that had been on the pier for, 15, 20 years. It's come to my attention and our attention that there is going to be additional expense beyond the agreed amount of money that the commission approved for this project, with all the redesign and re-engineering of the below ground work. Yeah, I don't know where you guys are at on answering questions. It's not quite clear whether or not that your transparency issue takes effect tonight, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Is there a dollar figure that we're going to be looking at for a change order in the future, a big change order for the pier with the five-month delay? And the other question would be combining this with the Shoreline Drive project. And the reason why sometimes I ask questions here at the podium is because more than likely some of the 7 commissioners don't know the answer, and if I ask it here and then somebody answers, then you have the same answer I do. But it's my understanding that not all the utility lines on Shoreline Drive are going to be buried, that it's only the low voltage wires, and there's only like maybe a small area that's going to be buried underground, which begs to the question, do we really need to tear up sidewalks that were put in place as part of the Sandusky Bay Pathway and to specifications for the Sandusky Bay Pathway 10, 15 years ago, when much of that sidewalk is not in that bad a shape? And I know you have a business downtown. Miss Lloyd, walks Shoreline Drive, jogs Shoreline Drive, and I'm sure Mr. Whoopser is very well aware of the conditions of the sidewalks the entire length. And I'm talking about the north side now of Shoreline Drive that aren't in that bad a shape. A lot of us see that as a waste of money to tear up sidewalks that are perfectly fine and then come back through and put down new sidewalks. So if anybody wants to answer that tonight, that's fine. If you want to answer it next week. But what I see with Mr. Murray's idea of asking a question online is that that's an effort, I don't want to use the word lack of transparency, but the only person that's going to know the answer to that is the person that asks the question. If it's asked here and it's answered here, then the public who you serve will see the answer, not just one person that asks it online. So I would like to see you reconsider, talk about it, come to a different idea. And I agree with the 5-minute thing. Where am I at? 3.5?
3:52.
3:52. Thank you very much. That's exactly right. So I'm short. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schwager. Anyone else wishing to address the commission?
I have a couple questions. Arlene Thompson, 1902 Adrian Circle, Sandusky. First question came about when you talked about the 270 trees. Oh, and make sure you let me know because that clock should be up here. So we know when we're talking to you how much time we have. Just a suggestion. The trees that you're going to plant, are they dependent upon the sidewalks being bulged this time? Question, how am I going to get an answer? Don't answer now. I don't know who else to call. This is our forum. This is where we ask questions. But like I said last time, we don't get the answers. That's my question. Are those 270 trees in this tree city, Adrian Circle, lost 9 of them back because of the bulge of the sidewalks? And then residents of Adrian Circle, I made the rounds to everybody on Adrian Circle and said, you can have a new red maple tree if you want it. Oh, no, we worry about it falling on the house. Well, come on. Every one that was taken down off that street should have been put back up. Shouldn't have had to talk to Mr. Klein and have him say, go around and survey your neighborhood. That's not my doing, but I got my food. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And the person that answers that or has the oil gets the vote. Bike week, the car show, the gathering. Who puts those on? The people of this city, because they care about the old cars. They care about the bikes, and we put up with Bike Week a lot longer than we put up with that car show. And it's a lot quieter, car show. When you're talking about taking a survey of the stakeholders, when I was a school teacher, I knew who the stakeholders were. They were my students and their parents and the taxpayers. I'm not sure who the stakeholders are. If you're asking the people who own businesses downtown, that's bias. Well, no, they can't come in and get a drink. They can't come in and throw an axe. Give me a break. That's foolish. And Washington Street, we've been going to these car shows. How many years, Linda? How many is this now? 20? I don't know, I'm old. A lot, me too. But the fact is, it's not that big of a deal, and you all know it. Now, we've lost the lunchbox. We may lose something in the Cook building, who knows? Time for answers. And we'll go back to the Ask the City. If we've got a question, we should put it on our Facebook page, because you all read those. You all keep track of us and what we're saying. Well, Mr. Brady, I'm sorry, you don't have time. You're reading all the Greek, whatever. I'm sorry, but this is our forum. And again, I'm up here to tell you that you don't answer questions. I think we asked for a meeting, the streets, Friends of the Jackson Street Pier asked for a meeting at our last commission meeting. I didn't get a call. I don't know that any of us in the group, the Friends of the Jackson Street Pier, got a call and said, you know, maybe we should sit down with you. I wrote a letter to the editor. How am I on time?
You got we're coming up on 1 minute.
Okay, good. That's just enough time. I wrote a letter to the City of Sandusky commissioners, and for some reason, it got in the paper. I don't know how, but I think it said, which one of you has the intestinal fortitude to come forward and say, it might have been a mistake? Your stakeholders are us, 25,000 of us, not the business owners downtown. If they make a profit, fine. When you go into business, you take a chance. Am I right? Take a chance, Mr. Brady.
30 seconds.
When you started. Oh, sorry. That's the question. You need to start answering questions. You have the nicest smile. I noticed you
Thank you.
smiled at an inappropriate time.
Give her more time.
I want
10
answers.
seconds.
Give me answers. Give us that meeting we asked
Like
for.
soccer. Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else?
Pastor Deb Lusher on 3511 Mathis Ave, Township. I just want to address the commissioners that we greatly appreciate the opportunity to be a part of Sandusky, the city of Sandusky, and to reach out to our community. The gathering was founded, first of all, I know it's not a religious thing, but it is God gave a vision to me to take prayer out of the four walls of the church, to bring it into the community, and to draw the community together with the church, to be a part of community together. When we come together, our intention is to pray for our commissioners, our city, our police department, our fire department, our schools, our children, and we bring it out of the four walls of the church into our community. We want to invest into our community. We want to pray and cover our community. And that's what we do at the gathering. We feel it's important to be in the town, not on Battery Park, not over there, but out where the community can see us, that we can draw them in to be a part where we have addiction, we have homelessness, we have abuse, we have all these things, and we want that opportunity to be out visually so that people can see and come in, and we have the opportunity to minister to them. One way, give them, we don't just pray, we bring in organizations from our community that help with the homeless, that help with domestic abuse. We had 13 different organizations this year set up tables at the gathering, along with 14 different churches of all denomination and all race. And that's what this is all about. We're about community. Our voice matters, and we need to be able to be in this is a perfect place for us. And I'm just asking you to consider not to move us out where people can't see us and the community can't see us. We do this together as a community because we care about our community. And we want to do this together, not by denomination, not by race, not by title, just community coming together for each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Anyone else present wishing to address the commission? The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We stand adjourned.